John, I don't know if y'all turned the sound on yet, but it's not coming through yet.
Good morning.
I can hear you, Beth Ann. I can't hear them. Can you hear them?
Today is Wednesday, February the 12th, 2025. The time is 9:03 a.m. To establish a quorum, let's do a roll call. Dr. Clint Boone. Here. Dr. Brian Jolly. Here. Dr. Beth Ann Davenport.
Here.
Dr. Debbie Mack.
Here.
Dr. Lenore Newsom.
Here.
Dr. Fouché. Here. Mr. Harold Simpson. Here. And myself. I'd like to recognize the staff, Dr. Kirtley and Dr. McCready, and also Council Ashley Vales. We have another student with us today. Students from yesterday were here. I'd like to recognize Chelsea Flowers, who is here from UAMS, just visiting. Thank you for coming. I'd like to turn it over this morning to the hearing officer, Mr. Chris Madison.
Thank you, sir. My name is Chris Madison, and I'm here to act as your hearing officer today. I understand we have several hearings we need to get to. Counsel for the board, Ms. Vales, I want to say that correctly. Which case are we wanting to start with?
The first case that we need to take care of is Teresa David, and she's here if you want to have a seat in that chair.
Okay.
Button right here. Push. There you go.
Okay, we've got your microphone. Ms. David, I'm going to kind of read a little bit to you here and explain how administrative hearings work, okay? My name is Chris Madison. I'm the hearing officer in the matter of today of Teresa David. Your license, I think the PD license or application is 13840. And not sure. Case number is 2024 CE-6. And which is here before the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy. For purposes of the record, today is February the 12th, 2025. If you have your cell phones, I meant to say this earlier, please make sure they're silent so that they're not ringing in the middle of our hearing. Ma'am, would you be so kind as to identify yourself, say, and spell your name for the court reporter, please?
Okay, my name is Teresa David, Teresa David.
Ms. David, are you represented by counsel today?
No,
Okay. And you understand that you have the right to have counsel present, correct?
yes,
All right. And if anytime you don't understand what's going on in the proceedings, just let me know and we'll try to explain what's going on, okay? All right. And are you ready to proceed in this matter?
yes.
All right. Board's counsel, if you would, go ahead and identify yourself for the record.
Ashley Vales, General Counsel for the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
And I have a little reading I'm going to do here just to explain to you kind of what the hearing process is. So if you've not appeared in an administrative hearing, the board will base its decision solely on the evidence and arguments presented here today. This hearing is held under the Administrative Procedures Act, which means the strict rules of evidence do not apply, and the parties will be given latitude in introducing evidence and argument. Now, this is to promote a fair hearing and to provide the board with adequate information to make its decision. To ensure efficiency of the proceedings, I will grant objections or caution the parties only as necessary. If there's anything that you have in your possession that you want the board to consider, you must offer it into evidence today. Do you have some documents that you want to do? Have you provided those to counsel for the board previously?
Not
You go ahead and those over.
Those are just my live CEs as of today.
Okay. And just continuing on to let you know, the hearing today are subject to the Arkansas Freedom of Information Act. As such, all parts of the hearing, including the deliberations of the board, are open to the public. It is important that persons necessary to the hearing are in the room during the hearing. If a party, attorney, or board member needs to take a break or leave the room, let me know. We'll take a break, okay? Do you have any witnesses other than yourself that are going to testify today? No? Okay. All right. Ms. Vale, do you have any issues with the documents that she's presented?
I have no objection to entering those in and ask the board to give them appropriate weight. I'm gonna make copies for the board members and ask that we mark this as exhibit 6.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yep.
And when we get copies, I'll distribute them to the board members. I also have a preliminary motion if you want to take that up.
Well, let me go ahead and swear in the witnesses and then we'll take preliminary motions. All right, for anybody that's going to testify today, if you would be so kind as to raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mm.
Please let the record reflect witnesses affirmed. All right, you said there was a preliminary matter you wanted to address?
Yes, I just asked the board to take judicial notice of the applicable pharmacy statutes and rules that govern this hearing today. Those are outlined in the order notice of hearing in this case.
All right. Any other preliminary matters?
No.
All right. And so you have no objection to her documents. Have you had an opportunity to see the documents that the board is going to be introducing?
That folder.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Do you have any objections to those documents being introduced?
No.
All right. Counsel, I assume you're ready to proceed?
I am.
All right. Ma'am, are you ready to proceed?
Yes. I
All
am.
right. Anybody wish to make an opening statement?
I will waive opening statement.
Do you wish to make an opening statement to the board before we begin testimony? All right. If you would, Ms. Vales, if you'll call your first witness.
I called Dr. Brenda McCready. Dr. McCready, tell the board and the record what your job title is.
Hi, Brenda McCready. I'm the Assistant Director with the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
And as part of your duties as the Assistant Director of the Arkansas Pharmacy Board, do you perform audits on CE for pharmacists?
I do.
And did you have reason to audit Miss Teresa David, who's
I-
here today?
I did.
Tell me why you audited her.
The board actually does 100% audit of continuing education, and when we ran that audit, it indicated that she was short 12 hours of live continuing education.
How did you make that determination?
I verified that information by going to what we call the CPE Monitor Activity Transcript, which is a listing of all the continuing education that is ACPE accredited. It indicated that she had 30 hours of home study. She had 0 hours of live study, and that was from the period of 1/1/2022 through 12/31/2023, which is the renewal period in question.
And so for the record, this is one of the attestations that pharmacists must do in order to renew their license, correct?
It is, if you look under Exhibit 4, there's a document there that we send to each renewal person that is short, or appears to be short continuing education. And there is a line there that says, this is to certify that the attached documents are proof that I obtained at least 30 hours of continuing education consistent with board requirements during the 2022-2023 biennium, and it is signed by Teresa David.
And after reviewing her documents, do you believe that that attestation signed by Ms. David was correct?
I do not, although she did have 30 hours, she did not have the hours consistent with board requirements, which require 12 hours of live CE.
And that is in the time period of, can you repeat the time period?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry, 1/1/2022 through 12/31/2023.
Okay. And she's short 12 live hours,
She is
correct?
short 12 live hours. Also under tab number 4 is an email chain between Dr. David and myself. And it says, in the middle of the body, it says, "Hi Brenda, I'm really sorry that I overlooked the 12 live hours that I was supposed to do for my pharmacist license renewal. I'm willing to do the 24 live CEs that the board has determined me to do, but I'm appealing to your good office to waive the $1,200. Hoping for your kind consideration. Thank you, Teresa David, Arkansas Pharmacist License PD 13840.
And does the pharmacy rule governing the CE hours and the requirement give the board any authority to waive any of these obligations?
No, it does not.
Does the staff have the authority to waive any monetary penalties?
No, we do not.
And what is the standard for the monetary penalties that we have done in these types of cases?
Since I've been doing these audits, it's been $100 per hour. And we have collected the pharmacists that have violated that payment for, I would say, the last 5 or 6, maybe 7 renewals.
So each person that you've done an audit for, including Ms. David, has had the opportunity to take care of the matter in a non-disciplinary way. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And at this point, we are asking this to no longer be in that category. We're asking it to be a disciplinary matter.
That
The
is
board
correct.
sees fit, obviously.
That is correct.
Okay, how much time have you worked on these audits?
I started the audits in April of 2024, and I've been working on them consistently up until this time, even as of recent as yesterday.
How many times would you say on average have you reached out to people through phone calls, emails, any other letters, communications? How many times have you reached out to people that are in Ms. David's category that haven't gotten their CE hours?
I sent the initial consent agreement. I sent another one. I've made several phone calls. We've had several emails back and forth, 10, 12, 13 times. Even as recent as this last month, I was trying to get everybody information that we were going to hold a hearing if we didn't hear from them.
And that was how many people in general? Hundreds?
Hundreds. We started out with about 700 people. We are down to 7 that have not met the requirements or agreed to sign a consent agreement.
Right, and according to our GL records, how long has Ms. David been a licensed pharmacist in the state of Arkansas?
The GL file shows that she had a license during the 2015 to 2017 biennium, and going forward every year, every 2 years since then it was renewed.
Okay, and so Ms. David has introduced another CPE monitoring activity transcript.
That's correct.
And have you had an opportunity to look at that?
I have.
And tell me, that resolved the issue for you?
She has listed the renewal from 2/1 of 2023 to 12/12 of 2025. The hours we considered for this audit were from 1/1 of 2022 through 12/31 of 2023. So the hours in here that she's obtained live hours were after the renewal biennium. They were in this current biennium, not the one that we audited.
So that would count for the next renewal period, not the one we're discussing today.
That is correct. It would also count if she's, in the past, the pharmacists have been required to make up twice the hours, which this would cover twice the hours at this point, on the hours that she's obtained in 2024.
All right, anything else you want to add with regard to Ms. David? Ask the witness.
Ms. David, this is your opportunity to ask this witness questions.
You said none of those credits were,
I said none of the live credits
Okay.
counted in the 2021 to 2022 biennium.
because as far as I can remember, when we started communicating with each other, I think I did my best to catch up. You know, none of those?
Now, if you did the hours in 2024, as you said, I've made up the hours, but they were made up in 2024, so they don't count towards
2020?
the initial audit. They would count towards you making up the requirement if you had signed the consent agreement.
Any other questions? Ms. Bales, would you like to move to introduce your exhibits?
Yes.
They'll be admitted without objection. And just for purposes of the record, as I understand, your exhibits 1 through 5 are the boards, and then exhibit 6 would be the respondents pack. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I omitted that.
That's
Usually I
okay.
do that on the front end.
That's all right. All right. Do you have any additional witnesses, Ms. Bales?
I do not.
All right. It is your opportunity to talk to the board, to testify, and then you will have, she'll have the opportunity to ask you questions, but this is your opportunity to tell the board your side of the story.
As I said, I overlooked the part of the CEs and I did my best to catch up with them. And my concern now is just the monetary portion. So if I don't have that means the $1,200. Like one time, is that a one-time payment or?
So this is your opportunity to talk,
Yeah.
just tell your story,
Right.
not necessarily ask questions.
That was my side of the story. So I'm just now apologizing for all that. And if I can talk to you, the Board of Pharmacy to give me some repayment schedule and not not just one-time payment for the 1,200. I intend to keep my license and be diligent with the CE requirements from here onwards.
Anything else you want to add? Ms. Bales, do you have any questions?
I do have a couple. Are you licensed in other states besides Arkansas? And what is your status with their CE requirements?
I am compliant with all the CE
Okay.
requirements.
And so is your issue that you can't make a one-time $1,200 payment?
That is my
So
issue.
if we could work out some sort of,
Repayment? Or I don't know how we can.
yeah. What, if we set a date in the future that you'd have to pay in full, would that be helpful to you? We don't have the structure necessarily to set up small incremental
Okay.
payments.
Yeah, sure, that would work. I hope it's gonna be like farther down the road, not too soon.
Okay. But you understand, I guess, the violation and how that live hours were short. You're not contesting that.
I'm not.
Okay. If you could make that $1,200 payment by June 15th, would that be available?
um,
No,
At the end of the year.
end of the year. Okay. That's all I have for her.
Do you have any additional witnesses you wish to call? Board, do you have any questions of this witness?
Did you repay by the next renewal, by the time your next renewal is due? Of December?
Yes. At the end of, when is my next renewal? At end of this year. Yes,
And then you do understand the 24 hours don't count towards your 12-hour requirement for this biennium, so you'd be required to do 36 live hours.
I do understand that.
And then going forward, you understand like have to do, keep those requirements separate, even if you got different requirements for your home state. Got to do these separately and
Yes.
keep up.
I do understand.
Are you familiar with the CPE Plus monitor by NABP?
Yeah.
Okay, so they'll help you keep track of CE requirements in multiple states. Okay.
And it only costs $12 a year, I do believe. And then, Ms. Bales, can we go past our year end since our year end really ends in June?
Yeah, I was just discussing that with Dr. McCready. Our fiscal year ends June 30th of this year. We don't normally roll that over until the next fiscal year. Obviously, in this case, the $1,200, we would still ask for investigative costs for Dr. McCready's time. But my understanding is we don't normally roll that over. I'm not sure that we can roll that over to the next fiscal year. That's why I was asking about sort of a June deadline. Obviously, we'll comply with whatever board order you all want to do, but that's normally our practice.
Any other board questions? With that, do you have anything else to add, Ms. Davis? Ms. Vales, do you have any thing else, any other evidence to put on the record?
Can I recall Dr. McCready shortly, just briefly?
Yes.
Dr. McCready, when was the first communication with Ms. David regarding this issue with her CE?
The first communications were in April, but we did have an email back on August 5th of 2024 where she was aware that she had a $1,200 penalty to pay. There was no effort at that time to try to make arrangements to take care of that. Basically, she just said she wanted us to waive the fee, and I told her that I did not have the authority to waive the fee, that we could hold a hearing as we are today if she chose not to pay it. But it's not like she's not known since August that this fee was due.
And what do you estimate your investigative cost would be strictly on Ms. David's case?
I would say I've put in 8 to 10 hours. It would be about $750.
All right, anything else you want to add with regard to Ms. David?
No, ma'am.
That's all I have with rest.
Ms. David, do you have any other additional questions for Ms. McCready? Board, do y'all have any questions for Ms. McCready? Seeing none, we've rested. Do you have a closing statement you'd like to make, Ms. Vales? Ms. Vales?
No, I'll waive closing.
Do you have a closing statement you would like to provide to the board before they go into deliberations?
Questions?
Okay. All right, let's see. Closing arguments. All right. At this time, we're going to go off the record. I'm not sure how y'all do it, but generally we go off the record at the hearings I'm at so that the board can have their deliberations. And we'll come back on the record when you've reached a consensus on the action you want to take. With that, we'll go off the record. And board, you're welcome to discuss the matter.
Board, would y'all put on your microphones when y'all are discussing, please?
Thanks for the reminder. All right, what are your all's thoughts?
I'm wondering if there are extenuating circumstances of some sort that would make it necessary to move the penalty date past a June payment. I'm struggling to understand exactly if it's been known about since August, why it needs to pass at this fiscal year.
Well, I mean, she had the opportunity to make any claim if there was any, and so it would seem to be a matter of course. But it's been known since
Really,
August of
April.
last year at least.
I just think the opportunity for that amount of payment would have been prior to this hearing, and now we need to do, if we normally do it by June, I think we do it by June and take the full amount plus the work that Ms. McCready, Dr. McCready had to do.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like a fairly straightforward, like, this is the thing that happened. This is the repercussion of that. It's kind of across the board typically, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Debbie.
Do we have additional thoughts from folks here at the table? Dr. Mack, do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I will try that. Let me find the number.
Hang on a second. So has the board reached a consensus on its decision and action it wants to take?
Well, actually, before we go back on the record, let's just enumerate what we're going to put in the motion.
Okay, that's what thought you were doing, but I want to make sure of that.
That's what I was aiming to do. So we want
Sorry.
to acknowledge that the live CE has been met, and whether it goes in the motion or not, at least make sure that she is aware, like Dr. Boone pointed out, that the CE does not count for this coming year as well. So it's 24 hours of live CE that goes toward fulfilling the fine for this, but that she still has to get separate live CE for the current biennium. The $1,200 fine, make it due by June. And do we want to go for the full investigative cost or something less than that?
I think in terms of setting a precedent, if time is used and there's not a reasoning behind it, I don't think we want to open ourselves up to this happening more. So I would lean toward the full investigative cost.
Okay. All right, with that, I think we're ready.
All right, we are back on the record in the Teresa David case number 2024 CE-6. I believe the board has reached a decision. Board?
All right, Dr. Mack, you were going to make a motion?
I will make a motion on Teresa David, PD 13840, and the case number is 2024 CE6. That we require Miss David to make up the 24 hours, and those will count for the past due hours, not for current hours. So currently you would have to do your normal set of 30 hours with 12 being live. And that we uphold the fine that was to be paid, which, well, I believe it was it 1,200. I'm sorry, Dr. Richmond, I can't find it real quick. Okay, held the 1,200 plus the investigative costs of the 750, and this would all be due by June 15th.
Of 2025.
Yes, June 15th of 2025, which gives a year or more to do it anyway.
All right, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion that's been enunciated and a second by Dr. Newsom. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
We have one dissenting vote. The motion carries.
All right, so the results of the board were finding that the 24 hours you've met with the makeup, you're still owed 12 live hours. They found that the $1,200 fee is appropriate, plus the investigative cost of $750. So I have the total of $1,950 is due to the board by June 15th of 2025. Now, if you care to appeal the decision, this will be reduced to writing and there will be an order prepared by staff. And if you wish to appeal the decision, you can do so under, and I'm not sure if y'all have any specific appeal rules or you just follow under the State Administrative Procedures Act. There is a method by which you can appeal this decision to the Circuit Court of Pulaski County and have a judge review the decision of the board here also. And you're welcome to contact counsel if you wish to see that. If there are no other questions or comments, then counsel for the board, do you have any questions, comments? Ms. David, do you have any questions or comments?
Sorry, I already said I can't afford that, so I'll appeal. Is that the next step? Appeal? I
Yeah, I'll
can't
talk
afford
to you about that.
Okay.
Yep. All right, there's no other questions, comments. This hearing is concluded and the record is closed in the case of Teresa David, PD 13840, case 2024 CE-6.
Thank you.
What was your concern?
Grant Good.
Yes.
Okay, so, Mr. Good, my name is Chris Madison. I'm the hearing officer today in the matter of Grant Good. Is that how you say your name?
Fine.
PD 07837, case number 2024 CE 14, before the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy. Today is February the 12th, 2025. If you have a cell phone, please silence it. I've asked others to do that previously. Would you go ahead and say and spell your name for the purposes of the court reporter, please, sir?
Grant Good, GRANT GOODE.
All right, Mr. Good. Are you represented by counsel today?
No.
All right. Do you understand that you have the right to have counsel present with you?
Yes.
All right. And you receive a copy of the order and notice of hearing today?
Yes.
All right. And are you ready to proceed on the matter?
Yes.
Okay. And board's counsel, if you would, for purposes of this record, identify yourself, please.
Ashley Vales, General Counsel for the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
All right. I'm gonna read a little statement to you, Mr. Good. That's what I read to them a while ago, but it's to maintain accuracy and the purposes of this record. For the benefit of anyone present who have not appeared in an administrative hearing, the board will base its decision solely on the evidence and arguments presented here today. This hearing is held under the Administrative Procedures Act, which means that strict rule of evidence do not apply, and the parties will be given latitude in introducing evidence and argument. This is to promote a fair hearing and to provide the board with adequate information to make a decision. To ensure efficiency of the proceeding, I will grant objections or caution parties only as necessary. If there is anything that you have in your possession that you want the board to consider, you must offer it in evidence today. Do you have any documents or anything you want the board to consider?
No.
Okay. All participants to the hearing should be aware that these proceedings are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and as such, all parts of the hearing, including the deliberation of the board, is open to the public. It is important that all persons necessary to the hearing are in the room during the hearing. If a party or attorney or board member needs to take a break, let me know, and we'll see about taking a break in the proceedings. Do you have any additional witnesses that will be testifying besides yourself today?
No.
All right. All right. If we are ready to proceed, for those of you that are going to testify today, please raise your right hand. Are you going to testify today? All right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right. Please let the record reflect witnesses have affirmed. Are there any preliminary matters that we need to address, Ms. Vales?
Yeah, I just asked the board to take judicial notice of applicable pharmacy rules and statutes. And I move to admit into evidence board exhibits 1 through 6.
Do you have any objection to the introduction of the packet there in front of you?
No.
Okay. It will be admitted. Do you have any preliminary matters that you need to raise before the board before we begin testimony?
Not at the moment. I could use to run the restroom quick, but that's about it.
All right. Are you? Okay.
Right.
So, tell you what, let's go off the record a second. Let's let him run to the restroom and then we'll get the hearing going. We're off the record.
Do what now?
We're off the record. Do you want to run to the restroom?
Okay. Just a preliminary. I've had some.
We're off the record, so don't testify right now. If he comes back. I did a hearing for the cosmetology group. Vietnamese responding. And so they had this telephone translator thing. And they didn't tell me ahead of time that we were going to be dealing with a translator, so I wasn't prepared. Like, he just started talking. Translator would listen to a block of information and then repeat it. Walk in, and I have no idea if he's saying something. But finally, the translator was like, I need to stop so I can translate some of it. And so then she's, telling us, we're translating, and he's telling stuff from like 1982 and all this stuff. And I'm like, it was a pain just because of the translation issue. And I'm like, I don't know what he's saying is relevant or he's objected to. Exactly. I was like, I don't know. I don't know. It was like, I apologized to the board afterwards. I said, I'm sorry. I mean, Because had I known that's how it worked, I would have like timed him and been like, okay, you get like 2 minutes at a time, and then we're gonna translate. Because we need to determine whether that's something to object to or not. That was.
Yeah, it messes up the.
All right, we're gonna go back on the record. And Counselor for the board, do you have an opening statement?
I'll waive opening.
Mr. Good, do you have an opening statement you would like to make to the board before we begin testimony?
No.
All right. Ms. Vales, if you would call your first witness.
Call Dr. Brenda McCready. Have you been sworn? Dr. McCready, state your name and job title for the board.
Brenda McCready, Assistant Director with the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
And as part of your duties as Assistant Director of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy, do you do complete audits on CE submissions for pharmacists?
I do.
And did you do one for Dr. Good?
I did.
And why did you do an audit for his, under his license?
Because when the numbers came in on renewal, it indicated that he was 9.75 live hours short of the 12 that he had to have for renewal.
Okay, and what is the renewal period that we're referencing?
January 1, 2022 through 12/31 of 2023.
So during that time frame, he was required to complete 30 hours total.
He was, and he completed 20 hours and 20.25 hours.
Okay. And again, are there under our rules and statutes any discretion with regard to this requirement for continuing education for pharmacists? Is there any opportunity to waive the requirements under any particular circumstances allowable under the law?
There's not.
And tell the board about your communication with Dr. Good.
Under Exhibit 4, I sent a Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy continuing education verification form. Dr. Good sent it back saying that he had met the 30 hours of continuing education consistent with board requirements during the 2022-2023 biennium.
And that's Exhibit 4 for the
That's Exhibit
record.
4.
And after your review of the documents, is that attestation that Dr. Good did a true and correct statement?
It is not. He actually had included hours from 2024.
And why don't those work?
The renewal period is from 1/1 of 2022 to 12/31 of 2023, so that you can renew. It's to get those hours during that biennium for the capability of renewing for the next biennium.
All right, and when you identified for Dr. Good that there was a problem with his CE hours, what was his response?
I sent him an email and told him that the hours from 2024 did not count. That email is for exhibit. It's under Exhibit 4. And it is an email that says, the consent, this is Dr. Good, the consent agreement requires you to make up twice the hours missed and pay a monetary penalty of $100 per hour missed. The requirements of the consent agreement are set by the board and not by staff. Once all audits are complete, consent agreements will be sent, and most likely in June. You can let me know if you'd prefer to have a hearing before the board at that time. And he responded, I would prefer to meet before the board and surrender my license as I haven't practiced in 10 years and never plan to practice again. I will be out of the country July 5th, so I could not go, I could go before the board after then.
And so why does his offer to surrender his license not work in this situation?
Because the hours were required during the biennium when he was licensed with the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy. The rule states that you will obtain those hours during the renewal period, not so that you can renew on the next biennium. And the hours that he sent us were obtained in 2024, which do not count. They would count for the 2024-2025 biennium, or they could be used as makeup hours for the hours that he was short, but they can't be used to meet his requirement because he hadn't done those hours.
And so in this case, there was no offer of any consent agreement or any making up the hours.
No, he said he wanted to come before the board.
Okay. And what is your recommendation for this matter with Dr. Good?
Because he held the license and was a licensed pharmacist during this time, I feel that he should have to pay the penalty as well as the investigative costs, although they're not as great on this one because once he said he wanted a hearing, there were no more costs incurred. I spent about 4 hours on
What
this.
would be the standard penalty that the board has done in the past for a situation?
So $100 per hour missed.
So you're asking for $100 per hour missed
Correct.
and 4 hours worth of investigative costs. Anything else you want to add? Or, well, let's go before we conclude. Turn to Exhibit 6
Okay.
and tell me what Exhibit 6 reflects.
Exhibit 6 is just a copy of the data in the GL licensing database. And it just basically indicates that Dr. Good has been a licensed pharmacist for many, many years, and the CE requirements haven't changed in this time period. He's very well aware of what the CE requirements are, as is any pharmacist that's licensed in the state of Arkansas.
With that, anything else you want to add with regard to Dr. Good's?
No, ma'am.
All right, pass the witness.
Mr. Good, this is your opportunity to ask.
So just a little background. I've had some health problems.
So this is you get opportunity to tell the board your side of the story. This is your opportunity to ask this witness questions.
Did is there an email where I asked what my options were? And someone responded that that I could just surrender my license and forego any penalties.
There's not an email to that. The Board of Pharmacy has never allowed that to happen. And as to the best of my knowledge, I didn't send an email to that effect.
I have,
You did
I
send-
have an email, somebody responded and that's what they told me. They said, if you don't want to, you know, make up these hours, you can surrender your license and the board can, you know, basically not pay a penalty.
There is an email in here that says, this is from Dr. Good, and it's in Exhibit 4. It says, can I just remove my application for licensure in Arkansas, period, and be done with this? I said, Dr. Good, unfortunately, no. When you renewed, you attested to having 12 live and 18 other CE hours for a total of 30 hours. The only thing staff can do is offer you the standard consent agreement or schedule you for a hearing before the board. You could at that time ask them to allow you to permanently surrender your license in lieu of the penalty of making up the hours. I did not say that you could do that. I didn't say that the board would approve that because they never have, but I did tell you that you could ask them.
Okay.
Any other questions for this witness?
No.
All right. Do you have any, does the board have any questions for this witness?
Dr. McCready, did you say 9.5 hours short?
9.75.
Okay, so that correlates to a $975 fine as far as that goes. Okay. Do you happen to know how many hours in the current biennium he's completed?
I don't, I do not have that information.
Thank you.
What are we valuing the investigative costs per hour?
I did 4 and I'm basing it on my salary. I normally make about, I think it's 86.
Any other board questions for this witness? Do you have any redirect questions, Ms. Bales?
No, I do not.
Based on the board's questions, do you have any questions for this witness?
No.
All right. Do you have any additional witnesses, Ms. Bales?
No witnesses, just probably questions for Dr. Good.
Okay, Dr. Good, this is your opportunity to tell the board your side of the story now. I remind you that you're under oath, so tell the board your side of the story.
So just a little background. I've had some health problems. I had a leak in my home that had mold develop and around 21 and started having symptoms, and it took a couple years to figure out that I had a big problem with mold. And so I've gradually had this domino of effects from that, including cataracts, my hearing loss. I can't really see your faces. I can see a blurred image. So I'm waiting on cataract surgery, just had sinus surgery. And so neurologically, it's affected me some. Now I did the hours, and at the time, there was a course that is a mold and mycotoxin course by Dr. Krista. That's an AMA approved course, and it also said pharmacy approved. And it was not a live course, but I made this association that basically the format is a full 10 hours. I paid between $600 and $800 for it. And it's basically, you know, a teaching deal, and then you take a test just like you would if it was a live hours. But somehow I didn't associate this with, this is not live hours. This would not apply for my CE. But I did turn in a certificate for that when I turned in my hours. And that's what they said, well, that doesn't apply. And then, so I tried to turn around and make that up with live CE hours, but that was too late. So I mean, I did turn in 10 hours of live, I mean, not live, but a AMA approved course for doctors on mold and mycotoxin illness. So that's where that's at. So I'm still trying to get over this. And I mean, even this morning, I got, you know, confused. I went the wrong direction to get to the board meeting when I parked right out front. I thought it was in the building they're doing the construction on. So there's some, you know, there's some issues there. So I would, and like I said in my email, I've not practiced pharmacy in 10 years. I'm doing something else. And I don't think I would be capable of practicing pharmacy at this point. I don't have the energy. I couldn't see the screen. I would have trouble hearing patients. So that's why I say I would prefer just to surrender my license and avoid any penalties from this because of the situation. So that's my statement.
Okay. Ms. Bales, cross-examination?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. What do you do for income now?
What now?
What do you do for income now?
I'm developing property, but that's a much slower situation than trying to manage pharmacy. And there's been some hiccups and even in that process of getting things a little backwards. Fortunately, I have some people around me that kind of help me. You know, it's not a problem of me understanding it. It's a problem of just, you know, there's some ADD and some other things that have gone, that have come about from this, you know, high mycotoxin count I've got in my body, which takes a long time to basically flush out.
That's all the question I have for Dr. Good.
Board members, do you have any questions?
But when was the last time that you worked at best of your recollection?
Well, unfortunately, the last time I worked was at Perry County Food and Drug, and I was involved in the DEA situation over there, testified in federal court against my first cousin, which is something I didn't want to be involved in, but I just happened to land in that place. And, you know, And that's the last time I practiced. And of course, that was a very bad taste in my mouth from that whole situation.
So what did you do in the context of that activity that constituted the practice of pharmacy?
And what?
So you said you were involved in apparently a case.
I was a pharmacist. I mean, I was a staff pharmacist at that
Okay,
time in
so-
2014, 2015.
Okay. And that was, I mean, could you put a month to it, like June of 2014, June of 2015?
Say that again.
I'm just looking to see if you could answer for me as best as you can, the last time, whether it's the month or just simply the year.
February of it's probably February of 2015.
Okay. And I know this would sound mutually exclusive, but I'm going to ask you a different question. So did you practice pharmacy at all during the calendar year of 2022?
I've not practiced pharmacy since.
Okay.
Since
And then
2015.
similar question. So did you practice pharmacy during the calendar year of 2023?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board member questions? Online participants, any questions?
I have one question, but I think it would be for Dr. McCready. Can I ask her?
When she's recalled as a witness, then you can ask the question of her.
I have a question for Dr. Good based on the board's questions, if I could.
I was going to go there next.
Thank you. So Dr. Good, you've had your pharmacist license since 2014 at least, correct?
I think February 2015 is when this all went down over there. So that was the last time I practiced.
Well, I'm not asking about when you practiced, but you still maintained your
Yes,
license.
I maintained the license since
And,
then.
and
Actually, I think I maintained my license since probably 2012.
And up until you had this I mean, you're free to surrender your license at any time. Up until you had this exchange with Dr. McCready, you didn't surrender your license at that point. You were doing CE with the intention of keeping your license. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I was trying to maintain my license, but I don't think there was any intent ever to use a license again.
Okay. All right, that's all I have for Dr. Good.
Based on that, board, do you have any questions?
I have one question.
I knew my online people did.
Mr. Good, so am I understanding correctly that you thought the mycotoxin and mold training that was online, you were under the impression that it was live and just were mistaken about that? So you did know there was a live requirement. You just thought that the CE that you were completing met that requirement, but it didn't. Am I understanding you correctly?
Somebody say that question again.
She asked whether or not the AMA class you attended, you believed would qualify for the live CE.
I did believe that. Somehow got it confused, but it did say on Dr. Christus continuing education screen approved for pharmacists. But it didn't say, when I went back and looked at it, I have a certificate for a pharmacist, but it's not an ACPE approved course.
My question is getting to the point of, are you sort of saying that this is more of a clerical error on your part than just not doing what needed to be done?
Yeah, I think it was confusion on my part that it wasn't, when I looked at the series, the continuing education, it was, to me, it was basically the same exact thing as live. I mean, I could email Dr. Krista with questions, but it was just, it's a video series of her talking and pulling up just like you would watch a normal pharmacy live deal. And then at the end of each little section, you've got a test. So you have to pass that test before you can go to the next section. And it requires a full 10 hours, not like a pharmacy CE where, it's not always a full amount of time.
Did you provide a certificate printout on that?
Yes.
Do we have a copy of that?
Yeah.
In the booklet? Okay.
Yeah, I provided a certificate and then they emailed me and said, hey, this isn't live. And I was like, oh, somehow I didn't make that association.
Any other questions? For this witness? Ms. Vales, I believe you wanted to recall Ms. McCready?
I do recall Dr. Brenda McCready. Dr. McCready, what is Live E? CE?
Live CE is a continuing education course that has an interactive component where the presenter and the person taking the course have, as I said, interaction where there are questions asked and answered. It is not a pre-recorded program that you can watch on the screen.
So you can ask questions of the presenter.
You can ask, normally it's online, there's a chat where you can ask questions. There's a evaluation or a survey at the end where you have to answer questions regarding that course or that has been presented.
And how does the Board of Pharmacy staff evaluate what we give CE credit for?
Well, if it's ACP accredited, it actually has an L in it that shows that it was live.
And for the record, what's ACPE?
ACP is the accreditation organization that accredits continuing education.
Okay, so if it has that insignia on the documents, it will count, correct?
If it's got the L and then the dash and then whatever the course information is, it's got a code there that tells what that course information. So when the CPE monitor lists your CE, it lists whether it's live or whether it's non-live, based on the code that's with that course. The course that Dr. Good sent to us, when I received it, I told him that what he sent me was not proof of CE. And on May 24th, I said, this is not proof of attendance. I would suggest contacting them and getting written documentation that you attended the seminar.
And what did Dr. Good send you with regard to that
He
class?
sent me just a certificate that he had earned continuing education by watching this seminar. He did email me back on the 24th and said it's online. If it's a video continuing education course offered by Dr. Krista, Begin Your Healing Journey Here, who is an expert in mold illness and treating it with alternative methods as well as Western medicine methods. I responded and said, is it pre-recorded? If so, that is not live continuing education. And then he said, can I just remove my application for licensure in Arkansas and period and be done with this? And that's when I told him no, that at this point he had attested that he had met the requirements and I did not have the authority to let him do that.
So you asked for additional information on this course that he's referring to. Did you, but you didn't get it?
I don't see it in this paperwork.
Okay. So you got some sort of document, but you weren't sure about the actual attendance
When I asked,
record.
that's correct. When I asked if he attended, I told him that this was not proof of attendance, and he said it was an online session. That it was a video, and he also said that the video course is for all, these are his words, the video course is for all practical purposes live. It is no difference than watching live instruction on free CE. What is the standard consent agreement? And I told him what the agreement was, and then he said he'd prefer to come to the board.
All right, anything else you want to add with regard to Dr. Good specifically, or the types of courses that we accredit?
I would say that in the years that I've been doing continuing education, I don't remember having Dr. Good in here. He's been licensed as a pharmacist in Arkansas since, he said 2012. He's known what the requirements are. He's met the requirements. The law book clearly states that the live CE must have a live component and then an interactive component.
All right, anything else you want to add?
No, ma'am.
Rest.
Good, do you have any, I'll get you just a minute. Or Mr. Good, do you have any questions on the redirect?
No, I don't have any questions. I mean, I've got a little statement.
We'll get that in just a moment. Board, do you have questions for Ms. McGrady? I know my online one did for sure, so.
I have a question for Ms. Bales.
Do you have a question for Ms. McGrady?
Yes.
If you would go ahead and.
Dr. McCready, I just want to make sure I follow this. On the very first thing in the packet, it shows 20.25 hours, not 30. And is that because that 10-hour course isn't showing at all? Because you have to enter that manually, I guess, to get it to count, right?
Yes.
So if it were added, he would have had 30.25, but it still wasn't live, so therefore it didn't meet the live. Is that what we're saying here?
That is correct.
Okay. Cause he could have entered it manually and it would have shown he had 30 hours, but it wouldn't really fix the issue we're talking about. Okay,
On audit, I would not have counted it as live because it was a pre-recorded course and there was no interactive component.
right. You got it. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
All right, any other board questions of this witness? And the question you have for council is that,
Yeah, Ms. Bales, I have kind of a technical question. Is the board allowed to make a motion based on a condition of whether Dr. Good wants to keep his license versus wanting to surrender it? To frame a motion based on his choice on whether to keep, retain, or surrender.
Are you saying you'd
His
make a
license.
motion conditioned on whether or not he surrendered his license?
A motion based on if he wants to keep his license, he has to do this. If he doesn't want to keep his license,
I mean, I think,
or would it be better just to determine that by talking to him today?
well, I
during
think
this?
the issue is he had the license and the look back period, he didn't get the CE. That would be my argument.
No, I understand that.
But
Yeah.
I understand if you want to phrase a motion, I mean, I think you can.
Okay.
If that answers your question, I think
does,
I
yeah.
confused you and me.
No.
and,
you
and,
didn't.
and we can vet this out some more during the deliberation
Okay.
period also, if you wish. So, Ms. Bales, any additional witnesses?
No.
Mr. Good, do you have any additional witnesses?
No.
All right, Ms. Bales, would you like my closing statement?
I think what I heard statement, I just think that the board needs to be very careful about how you handle this situation. This has been a red letter year for people not getting their CE. Dr. McCrady's been working on this nonstop. So I think, while I'm not saying that we need to make an example out of Dr. Good, but we do need to make sure that the pharmacy profession is aware of their responsibilities and that the board's going to hold them to this. So we would ask that Mr. Good be treated as the board does in every situation. Whether or not he wants to surrender his license is perfectly his right, but he had a license and he didn't meet the requirements for keeping that license when he had it because he didn't get a CE in. And it's as simple as that. So I would ask the board to discipline Dr. Good for this and hold him to the same standard we hold everyone else.
Mr. Good, do you have any closing statement you'd like to make to the board?
I've explained to the board the situation and how I was interpreting things at the time. I think these are circumstances that are not normal for anybody. So I think the board should have the opportunity to show some mercy here rather than just slapping a fine on somebody because they've been sick and not thinking clearly. So it's, I've been, I became a pharmacist in the early 90s. I've practiced, off and on all over the state, especially all over central Arkansas, for multiple pharmacies, as a relief pharmacist or as a staff pharmacist or a pharmacist in charge. So I think the board does have the leeway to decide something different. That's all.
All right, at this time, we're going to go off the record for the board to do its deliberations, and you have a decision. You'll make your motion on findings of fact, conclusions of law, and any penalties or waiver penalties as you decide. And then once we get a decision from our deliberations, we'll come back on the record and make it official and do the vote. Any questions before we go off the record? Seeing none, we're off the record.
All right. So what's the thoughts of the board?
I have a general policy issue I want to raise. Let's say, for instance, the fiscal year, the year is completed, the CLE information's turned in, the board determines the person didn't meet the continuing education requirements for that year. Would there be, from a policy standpoint, a negative to having the licensee have an option at that point to surrender their license and everything be done with it. And that ends the entire process. Is there some negative ramification that would flow from a policy like that?
I'm not
Us-
sure how it interacts with what you just said, but what I would say is that I think it makes a material difference if they practice during the period for which they were supposed to be getting continuing education versus having not. Because the intent is not about the number of hours. The intent is not even about the specific type of CE. The intent is that during the period of time, the pharmacist be competent. But if you're not practicing pharmacy during the time for which the CE renewal applies, irrespective of whether you're applying for future renewal or not, no harm, no foul.
So let's assume that happened and there was a practice of pharmacy. Then you're saying that whatever action we take would really relate to the harm. I use that word really loosely, but the harm that took place during that interval between the beginning of the year and when the license was surrendered.
Yes.
I have a question. Given the extenuating circumstances and the fact that he hasn't practiced, would it be possible to let the repercussion of not getting the CE be surrendering the license and then reduce the fine to cover the investigative costs that were in addition to, but not the fine that would be making up the CE? So I don't know, what was it, 450? I don't remember the number.
Is that directed at me?
No,
What to say that? Somebody else say that I can hear the screen very
No.
well.
that's for board discussion.
Okay.
I think if you're talking about investigative costs, Beth Ann, I think it was 4 hours.
I guess my question would be, would that be something that, like, if surrendering the license because he did not practice and there were extenuating circumstances with his health, would it be reasonable for the repercussion of the issue with the CE to be surrendering his license and then for the fine to cover the investigative cost so that it's not like everyone can just come in and try and get out of paying? But because there are several extenuating circumstances, is that something that would be a reasonable option?
I think surrendering your license is about as extreme as you can get to get out of a fine.
Is what, Clint? We can't hear you.
It's probably about as extreme as you can get to get out of a fine, just to surrender your license. So.
I guess to answer directly your question, would it be reasonable? I think yes, it certainly would be reasonable and within the realm of consideration.
What's the authority to collect a fine once somebody surrenders their license?
Question for council. Harold, do you know?
We couldn't hear Clint.
I was just saying, what's the authority of the board to collect a fine once somebody surrendered their license?
Right.
Well, if it was incurring board expense, to me, that's something that should be accounted for.
Well, they're both occurring at the same time, the surrender of license and the levying of the fine is all happening at the same time, so.
Let me go back to my question. At the end of the year, you've submitted your CLE. At what point have we generally concluded the review and know? That period of time where there's going to be practice without having met the CE requirements, how long a period is that typically before someone would know?
Dr. McCready?
I'm sorry.
I think that'd be a question for Dr. McCready. I don't know the answer.
Well, they could have worked 22 to 23, and then it sounded like she lets them know no later than April of 24. So, I mean, they could have worked the whole 2 years without any CE, but we wouldn't know it till Dr. McCready does the relook at it. I mean, it's just kind of like the work's already been done, the issue's already there. We can believe he didn't work. We don't know he didn't work. I don't even know how you could prove that. But it's kind of, I do agree with Clint, if you give up your license, that's the ultimate. But it's kind of a bad precedent of, okay, now this is 2025 and we're gonna go say, okay, we'll excuse all this and you just give up your license. I don't know. It's just kind of a, whatever we do, this probably won't be the only time it ever comes up. So we have to think about it, I think.
And he asked to surrender his license back in May of 24. I mean, maybe before that's as earliest as I see on this email chain. It's just taken us
Yeah, May 23.
how to get here.
Kind of answer your question, Harold, the first email that we see in here is May 23rd of 2024. So that's about 5 months after.
So let me take that and run with it for just a second. So you've got 5 months. You've got a surrender of license. What penalty would we or charge or fine or cost, or whatever you want to call it, would we impose for those 5 months beyond the surrender of the license that took place?
In the context of this case, I guess the answer would be $975 plus investigative costs.
And of course, if there were many more hours of continuing education at issue, that could be more money.
Yes, $100 per credit.
Okay, obviously, a surrender of license like that would prevent the board from having to go through hearing and spend its time doing that. But is there a public policy interest that we're trying to achieve by going for a fine or penalty in addition to the surrender of the license?
I guess in my way of thinking that maybe I'm framing this and it might be incorrect, but to frame it in the context of whether someone would have an injury and that would form the basis of a lawsuit. Standard of care is that you get 30 hours of CE during the period of time prescribed as the law requires for live and otherwise ACPE accredited. Was there an injury? And is the injury the ability to practice pharmacy without a valid backed up license? In this case, there wouldn't be an injury because he didn't practice, at least according to his testimony. He's under sworn oath, so we take it as truth. So therefore, he breached the standard of care of not getting the CE, but there's no injury. That's the way I'm framing it.
So you would say there would be no harm to the public interest by allowing a surrender of license to take place under this situation, even though there was, even though the license was technically held for that period but not utilized?
Because it's not utilized, that's my answer, is because it wasn't utilized.
Thank you.
That's just my opinion though, Harold.
I'll share my thoughts. My thoughts would be that he still violated, came up short on his CE hours, and I don't think we should make an exception for that. Whether he wants to keep his license or not, if he doesn't, it's immaterial to me whether or not he gets any additional CE hours. To me, that becomes a moot point. For me, the 975 plus the investigative costs are consistent with what we've done in the past. I know he didn't practice, and I don't disagree with that train of thought. I think my mind is just going more to being consistent with the application because he was licensed. He knew he was licensed. He knew what his CE requirements were. But if he wants to surrender the license, I don't feel any need to try to chase 19 additional hours, double whatever he was short or whatever the number would be. But I would lean more toward being consistent from an application of what we expect in terms of per hour short $100 and then the investigative costs. So those are my thoughts.
I'm in agreement with Dr. Jolly. We can just chase this around the tree all day long. And what you did do, you did not get your CE in a timely manner. And you can go ahead and correct this now. And if you want to turn your license in, that's fine. But you need to own up to what happened. Pay your penalty and move on with your life.
We have two consenting or?
Well, I do want to say I'm empathetic to the situation, certainly sympathetic to the situation. And I just want to get that on for posterity's sake but there's a lot of extenuating circumstances. And I just think, again, consistency is the best policy because it becomes difficult to determine what you make an exception for versus what you don't. Just becomes a real blurry line. So.
And I
would
want
agree
to
with
make it
that.
clear. Oh, excuse me.
Oh, that's okay. I would agree with that just because it would be very hard to say this one we can skip it. The other one, another one will come about and they'll have a different kind of reason. And how do we determine really which reasons are the most valid or not? And that way, if we just stay consistent. Yeah, but he won't have to do a lot of hours if he's going to give his license up. We just would keep our normal fine structures the same.
So we're thinking, asking him to make up the hours, even though he's not practicing? We're not saying that, right?
If he wants to give his license up, I don't think he has to make the hours up. I just think
Okay.
he pays the fine and gives the license back.
I just want to make it clear that I don't think it makes any difference whether a person actually practices or holds a license and doesn't practice. I think the exact same rules apply. What my point was, would we want to consider a policy where we said when a shortage is discovered that they can be ended by the surrender of the license? And I understand the reasons why you don't think that's a good idea, but that's what my comment was addressed to, not to carving out some special, did you use your license exception?
And I think you make a good point because even though you don't practice in a biennium, it doesn't mean you don't change your mind the next biennium and start practicing. And the purpose of continuing education is to maintain a level of professional competency. I had one more thought, but I forgot it about something Rodney said that I agreed with, but lost it. But I think that's a good point. As far as, whether if someone surrenders their license, as far as what a licensing board or administrative agency can do in terms of collecting a monetary penalty, I don't know. We might have to go back on the record and ask Ms. Vales. I think that's a good point, though. That you brought up earlier.
Dr. Boone, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, that's my only question.
Okay. Dr. Crochet? So do we think we've arrived at a consensus? And before we go back on the record, can we enumerate what that will be? Dr. Jolly, can you name that?
So
we go
that,
back on the record.
well, I'm not back on the record. I'm just trying to spitball this in terms of a motion real quick. That's why I was asking the question earlier about framing the motion different ways, because I'm making this motion based on the assumption that Dr. Good wants to give up his pharmacist license. And so my motion would be that allegations are proven, charges are true in the case, and that we would impose a $100 per hour penalty for every hour that he was short, a $400 investigative costs, And if he is going to surrender, if he's going to surrender his license, I'm not really worried about the CE. I think the AMA 10-hour thing was probably good education. I know it was still short of live, but like I said, if he's not going to surrender his if he's going to surrender his license, I don't see a need to go back and recover those CE hours. So my motion, I'm thinking, unless you guys have other thoughts, would be more based around the monetary penalty part. Or I could frame it where if he's going to keep his license, he's got to get 19 point whatever that number would be, makeup, plus he's got to make sure his current biennium is 30 hours. I mean, how should I word that?
I would rather see you do it the latter, because if he's already going to be levied the monetary penalty, then there's no reason to close the door on him getting his CE for the next biennium.
Okay. So frame it like he's going to keep his license.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would that be his option, whether to give it up or not?
So I have a question in regard to that particular CE. I felt like Dr. McCready opened the possibility that had Dr. Good reached out to that group and said, can you give me some kind of a statement that, other than that certificate, that I attended, that I believe was the question that she asked. And Dr. Good did not respond to that and hasn't done anything with it. But at this point, if he chose to try to do that, and it were considered, I realize that's still not live, so he would have his lives to make up for all of his non-live hours satisfied.
Yes.
I believe. So there's really not any discussion on that piece of CE work. Okay. I just see where there's possibility for misunderstanding when you're looking for CE, particularly when it's not pharmacy CE. And it was obviously incorrect.
I mean, when I'm framing the motion, we could consider the 10 hours is acceptable and maybe not double it and just say you have to get 9.5. No,
No, just go.
just double it.
Just go straight down what we normally do. Don't start putting if and buts in there. So, muddy the water up a lot.
Are we also leaving in there though that he has the option to surrender his license in lieu of that?
I don't know how to word that in the motion.
No, I was just
I'm
go
just
straight
gonna-
down the
yeah.
line. Yeah, go by what the laws say, and then the ball is in his court as to what he want to do from there.
Okay. I think we're ready to go. I'm sorry. That's your job.
Yeah, the board comments.
I think we're ready to go back on.
All right, we're back on the record, and I believe the board, following some discussions, has a idea of consensus. So, board?
Dr. Jolly?
I'd like to make a motion in the matter of Grant Good, PD 07837, case number 2024 CE-14. Board of Pharmacy finds that allegations 1 through 4 are true. Charges 1 and 2 are proven. A motion would be that the board impose a $975 fine based on every hour of CE that was short for the biennium of 2022-2023. That we impose a investigative cost fine of, I'm gonna go with $350, and that Dr. Good be required to obtain twice the number of hours above and beyond the requirement for the current biennium to make up for the previous biennium.
And I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. Jolly, a second by Dr. Newsom. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is unanimous.
Motion unanimous. All right, Mr. Good, the board has reached its decision, and the decision was unanimous. The staff will reduce it to writing and provide an order to that effect. You have the right to appeal this decision to Circuit Court of Pulaski County if you wish to do so. You have to do that under the Administrative Procedures Act. It lays out the timelines in which you could do it. If you do seek to do that, you might want to seek out counsel yourself too, because you'll be in front of a judge at that point to review this decision. Are there any other questions or comments before we conclude this matter?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
The email chain, when I asked, okay, look, if I want to avoid this penalty or making up these hours or paying for these hours, I was told that I could come before the board, surrender my license and forego the penalty or the hours. So I wouldn't be here if I was told the truth to begin with. And I would have just done the hours and paid the penalty and not have to come before the board. So I'm kind of disgusted with this.
Okay. With that, we will close the record.
I could address the schedule.
Yeah.
So we have 4 more, participants in, CE violations. Those people are not here. I do have a 10 o'clock case with attorneys. I'm going to propose that maybe we take a break. We move to the attorney case and push these people that aren't here to the end of the day, maybe. I'm still going to have to present the case kind of ex parte if they're not here because they did get notice. But just for the sake of efficiency, I think we'd get through our morning a little bit better if we took care of those at another time. But I do want to say for the record, I had Dr. Kirtley, or I guess not on the record, but I did have Dr. Kirtley sound the hallway, and none of those other participants for 9 a.m. are here. So I feel comfortable moving those to the end of the day if that's what you all wish to do.
So that was 5. You said, it's 5, right?
4.
4 left. 4 more.
4 left.
I got 5 on the list.
Janelle Jackson is not here. Thomas K is not here. Masha Shabinya is not here. And Melissa Gowda is not here.
Dr. Koo.
I think he has been taken care of with the consent agreement on.
Okay, thank
That
you.
was not a lot. Okay.
Has not been taken care of. He
He's
is
not.
supposed to respond or call me and he has not done it.
Okay, so we may have 5, but he's not here either.
Well, thank you for addressing this.
I have one question. So if these 4 or 5 don't show up, can the board make a decision just based on routine? I mean,
mean, yeah,
historical procedures, can we make motions on
Yeah,
those?
so, we still need to present our case because they would still have the right to appeal that.
Yeah,
They did get notice, so we would just, Dr. McCray, I would call my witness, you would present
you would still run through it.
very
Yeah,
briefly.
okay.
And you could deliberate or however you wanted to take care of those, but for the time's sake, I think maybe do those at the end of the day since they're not here.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm suggesting we're gonna have a little bit of a lengthy case, so we might want to take a break now.
Let's 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah.
So we just go the other way around first. So I've been doing my whole life. Started a few years ago, out of frustration.
Yeah.
Dr. Davenport back. So a little administrative discussion for purposes of enlightening the board. We were outside discussing, there's actually two cases we're going to be dealing with Lumis Era. The first we're going to take up is the 2023-124 case, but there's also the 2025-008, which is a petition for declaratory order or declaratory judgment kind of thing. And we have agreed that all of the evidence we do in the first case will then be rolled into the second case because it's a legal issue. But for purposes of clarity, we're going to take on the first case, which is the Lumis Era Health Services LLC OS 02950 and OS 02703, case number 2023-124. And today is February 12th, 2025. If you have not done so already, please silence your cell phones. That's one of my reminders. Would the respondent and counsel please identify themselves, say and spell your name for purposes of the record, please? And turn your microphone on with the green button. That's so that the Zoom people can hear also. Just press it once. You got to get it green.
Hard push.
There you go.
All right, sorry. Good morning. My name is Tyler Gurss, TYLERGURSS. I'm a representative for Lumis Era.
All right. And just to verify for purposes of case number 2023-124, you did receive the order and notice of hearing concerning today's matter. Is that correct?
Yes, to be clear, we are proceeding, as I understand it, under an amended order and notice of hearing, which were sent to us, looks like January 14, 2025.
Counsel for the board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. All right. And I understand you're ready to proceed in the matter today, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Board counsel, will you please identify yourself for the record?
Ashley Bales, General Counsel for the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
All right. For purposes of those in attendance that may not be familiar with this, I have a little statement I read regarding Administrative Procedures Act. So the decision in this case will be decided on the evidence presented in this hearing between the parties. This hearing is held under the Administrative Procedures Act, which means the strict rule of evidence do not apply. And the parties will be given latitude in introducing evidence and argument. I believe we have stipulations on most all of the evidence to no objections. This is to promote a fair hearing and to provide the board with adequate information to make a decision. To ensure efficiency in proceedings, I will grant objections or caution parties only as necessary. If there's anything that you have in your possession that you want the board to consider, you must offer it into evidence today. We have counsel here. They understand that. All participants understand that this case is subject to the Freedom of Information Act and such. All parts of the hearing, including deliberations of the board, are open to the public. It's important that all persons necessary to the hearing are in the room during the hearing. If a party or attorney or board member needs to take a break, let us know. We'll take a break. We got some case to go through. With that, I'm going to go ahead and swear in the witnesses, and then we'll do introduction of exhibits. So for everyone that's going to testify in this matter, if you would, please raise your right hand for me. All right. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I do.
Please let the record reflect the witnesses have affirmed. So we have exhibits. Are there any objections to exhibits from the board?
No, sir. I have in my possession.
Hit your microphone, please.
Thank you for the reminder. I'll get that eventually. Have in my possession exhibits provided to me by counsel for the board 1 through 12 with a 1A as well. I have no objection to the introduction of those exhibits. And I know we're proceeding currently on the 2023 case, but my understanding those exhibits will be made part of the record in both cases. I provided board counsel with my exhibits A through G.
And board counsel, do you have any objection to their exhibits?
No.
All right, so please let the record reflect that exhibits will be admitted without objection. All right, are there any preliminary matters we need to discuss before we get started with the case?
I just asked board members to take judicial notice of applicable pharmacy regulation or rules and statutes that govern this case that are outlined in the order notice of hearing and reflected in the declaratory order case that we'll take up.
Counsel, do you have anything?
Nothing further.
All right. Does either side wish to make an opening statement?
I'd like to make a brief opening statement.
Counsel?
Board members, we are going to be discussing basically one statute today. It's Arkansas Code Annotated 1792-607A. And it reads as follows. It shall be unlawful for any nonprofit, tax exempt, or governmentally funded hospital to acquire direct or indirect interest in or otherwise hold directly or indirectly a licensed pharmacy permit pursuant to the provisions of 1792-405 for the sale or retail of drugs and medicines. We have, and I'm going to let Dr. Kirtley testify as to the history of this case, how this situation came to the board's attention. And in the first case, we're asking you to find that they misrepresented themselves on their application by answering the questions with regard to their nonprofit interest wrong. That caused us to issue a permit and what we believe would be in violation of 1792-607A. Had we known, we would not have initially issued those permits. When we did find out, I'll let Dr. Kirtley kind of explain what led us to being here today. Also, we'll have many, many exhibits. So I'm unfortunately going to test your skills on navigating these tablets. So I have two folders on your tablets. The one we'll mostly be talking about first says Lumis Era Order Notice of Hearing. Mr. Castleberry has one folder for all his exhibits. It's in the folder entitled Lumis Era Declaratory Order. So if at any point you feel like we're not looking at the same document, please wave me down and we'll stop and make sure everybody's looking at the same thing. But that's what we'll be discussing this morning. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Castleberry.
Thank you, counsel. Board members, again, my name is Casey Castleberry. I'm a lawyer here in Little Rock and represent Lumis Era in this matter. I agree with Ms. Bales that the issues before you today primarily revolve around a statute, Arkansas Code Annotated 17-92-607 and the interpretation of that statute. I don't believe there's going to be any dispute, board members, as to the ownership structure of Lumis Era. All of the organic documents of all the related entities have gone into evidence already, and we're not arguing about what those documents provide. There is a chart in the exhibits. I understand that board counsel has provided or is going to provide now a copy to you all as well. I've blown it up, but I think now that they've got a copy, it's going to be more convenient to just refer you to the copy before you because there's a lot of small names on that chart. For the record, this was Exhibit 16 to the affidavit of Paul Page, which was made Exhibit F to these proceedings. What you'll find from that chart, ladies and gentlemen, and what will be discussed in the testimony is that Lumis Era Health Services, which is over here on the right side of that chart in red, is owned by Navitas Health Solutions, and we'll discuss this in more detail during the testimony, but through a series of entities ownership goes up to the ultimate parent company, which is SSM Healthcare Corporation. SSM Healthcare Corporation is a nonprofit entity, and it is the sole shareholder of FFP Inc. and the great-great-grandparent, if you will, of Lumis Era, which is at issue today. There is no ownership in that chain on the right side of your chart that is or operates a hospital. There's no hospitals over there. On the left side of your chart, there are 4 additional nonprofit entities that own and operate hospitals. So you have one parent company that owns and operates hospitals on the one hand, and owns companies that ultimately own Lumis Era on the other hand. And so what you're going to be presented with today, ladies and gentlemen, is this statute provides that no nonprofit hospital may acquire or hold directly or indirectly an interest in a licensed pharmacy. And it's our position, and we believe that the correct interpretation of this statute will provide that the nonprofit hospitals on the left side of this chart do not directly or indirectly hold any interest in Lumis Era, the pharmacy on the right hand of the chart. Common ownership is not enough. And I believe the testimony will further be that there's no relationship, there's no sharing of employees, there's different boards of directors, there's different officers, different employees on both sides of this org chart, such that each of these entities is a separate and distinct legal entity, which is black letter law in the state of Arkansas, that a corporation or a limited liability company is an entity separate and distinct from its members or shareholders. So that's going to be the overarching question in both proceedings before you today. In the first proceeding, the amended order and notice alleged that Lumis Era made misrepresentations. I believe the words used in the order are fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation in answering certain questions on those applications. There will be 2 applications presented to you that Lumis Era submitted to the Board of Pharmacy. One was in 2016, one was in 2021. They're slightly different, but they basically ask the same 2 questions. And those are, number 1, is there any nonprofit ownership in your pharmacy? Number 2, any ownership by or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital? Lumis Era maintains that its answer of no was the correct answer to both of those questions. Factually accurate, and there can be no misrepresentation. Further, even if the answer is incorrect, if you should find today that that answer is wrong, that you interpret the statute consistent with the board council's interpretation of the statute. Even if you make that finding, that's still not enough to sanction Lumis Era for the answer that it gave on the application, because fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation, all as defined in Black's Law Dictionary, require an element of intent. And there'll be no evidence presented to you today that there was any intent on behalf of Lumis Era to mislead, to lie, to deceive the board when it submitted those applications in 2016 and 2020. So it's our position, trying to keep this narrow while also understanding the broader picture with respect to both matters before you today, that this statute, read consistent with its plain language, does not affect Lumis Era, given the ownership structure that's been presented to you and that will be proven through the testimony today. And even if it does, the answers given on the application are not sufficient to rise to the level of a punishable offense, because there was no intent to deceive in the submission of these applications. So I thank you for your time and look forward to proceeding before you this morning.
I have just one. We have 2 board members that are via Zoom. the chart that I passed out to the board members and that Mr. Castleberry and I will be discussing is also in your board tablets. And if you'll look, Lumis Era Order Notice of Hearing folder, it's at the very bottom. It says organizational chart printed. So if you want to review that chart, it is there for you if you are appearing via Zoom.
All right. Thank you, council, both for your opening statements. Just confirming that all exhibits have been introduced and accepted and admitted. And with that, counsel for the board, please call your first witness.
Call Dr. Kirtley. Dr. Kirtley, state your full name and title for the record, please.
My name is John Clay Kirtley. I'm the Executive Director of the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
And we have charged Lumis Era under case number 2023-124 with some violations of our statutes and regulations or rules. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And did you play a part in, I guess, the investigation or research into this issue?
Yes, I did.
And how did this issue with Lumis Era's permits come to the attention of the board?
A few months back, or actually, I guess a couple of years back now, I received a phone call from a pharmacist, John Benson. It's well known. He's with the Arkansas Pharmacist Association, and he asked me the question if I was aware of who owned Lumis Era as a pharmacy. And my awareness was that it was owned by Navitus. He asked if I knew who owned Navitus, which is a pharmacy benefits manager, and I did not know. He said he thought it was SSM Health, a not-for-profit corporation that has ownership in not-for-profit hospitals. At that time, I said, well, if you want me to look into this, you need to file a complaint with the Board of Pharmacy, which he subsequently did, I believe, which is under tab 3.
All right. And so in part of your investigation into this inquiry or complaint, did you pull the applications for Lumis Era Health?
Yes, I pulled both their out-of-state pharmacy applications for review.
And the first application, is that under Exhibit 1?
Yes, it is.
And the second application is Exhibit 2, and was that a change of ownership?
Yes, Exhibit 2 is a change of ownership. That was their second facility. They got licensed in the state of Arkansas.
And are the questions on both of these applications the same with regard to ownership and not ownership, but interest in nonprofit?
They are similar. They're not exactly the same.
Look at the first application.
Okay, under tab 1 on page 4. If you need additional space for the corporate officer list, please attach list as a separate document. Is there any nonprofit ownership of your pharmacy? Any ownership by or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital? Which they answered no.
Okay. And Exhibit 2, can you point the board to that question in the application?
It is also on page 4, down in the middle of the page. Question E, is there any nonprofit interest in your pharmacy? Which was answered no. Any interest in or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital? Which was also answered no.
Okay. And what did you do after you received the written inquiry or complaint to determine whether or not there was any substantial or substantive evidence to support the complaint?
Initially, it was as simple as just doing Google searches to find out who owned either Lumis Era or its parent company, Navitus. Pretty quickly, we found that it was owned by SSM Health. In doing other background research on SSM Health, it became obvious fairly quickly that they were a owner of several not-for-profit hospitals and corporations with clinics and hospitals.
All right, and let's go over some of your research if you'd like to do that.
Okay.
It should be behind, is that 8? Yes, tab 8, and I'll refer you there. Exhibit 8, does that reflect some of the documents that you pulled from various sources with regard to the ownership interest in Lumis Era?
Yes, the first thing behind tab number 8 is off of the actual Lumis Era Pharmacy website. It is the HIPAA Notice of Privacy Practices. In reviewing their Notice of Privacy Practices on page 2, for instance, it has, if you ask questions or file a complaint if you feel your rights are violated in relation to your HIPAA rights. In the middle of that, it has it actually has a phone number to reach their privacy officer, an 833-354-2223. If you flip to the last page of the HIPAA privacy notice, you also have the privacy officer that could be reached at Lumis Era Health Services, 310 Integrity Drive, Madison, Wisconsin, at that same phone number, 833-354-2223. Looking at some of Lumis Era's other content immediately behind that, if you look at their contact us, they note that they have various, headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin, with additional either owned facilities in Arizona, California, Washington, D.C., and partner facilities in Illinois and Missouri. You look under the SSM Health Specialty Pharmacy. They have the 310 Integrity Drive, which is the location of the HIPAA privacy officer or for mail. And then below that, or with that, you also have a couple of other pharmacies, including one. If you flip over, I have a sheet on it, SSM Health Specialty Pharmacy, which is part of SSM Health Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital. And their phone number is 833-354-2223. The next page, if you look just a Google search of the NPI registration for that pharmacy itself appears to be owned by the provider organization of SSM Healthcare St. Louis.
So what conclusion did you make with regard to these documents that you researched that we just went over?
When we look at the terms of the statute, it doesn't necessarily say ownership. It says direct or indirect interest, which the most obvious way would be ownership. But even when we look at that, if we look at the chart of SSM Health organizational chart, you have over on the far right side, Lumis Era Health Services, where the pharmacy is located. But there's a direct link even through their HIPAA privacy for any patients that feel that they've had their HIPAA privacy violated directly to the far left side under SSM Healthcare St. Louis. To the second box below that, SSM Cardinal Glennon's Children's Hospital, DBA SSM Health Cardinal Glennon's Children's Hospital, to a retail pharmacy that appears to be owned directly by that corporation. So it appears their own HIPAA officer contact is part of a directly hospital or not-for-profit hospital-owned pharmacy.
So if I'm a patient of Lumis Era and I have an issue with HIPAA, I'm traveling all the way over via phone number or contact information to what side of that chart?
To the far left under SSM Healthcare St. Louis to this retail pharmacy there.
Okay, and let's go over some of the other conclusions that you were able to make looking at your research with regard to nonprofit hospital interests.
When you look at their nonprofit hospital interest, it is a broad swath of business under 4 main corporations that holds a little over 20 different not-for-profit hospitals. There appear to be some potential similar links of interest between those not-for-profit hospitals or their ownership back to the, not just Navitus, but the Lumis Era pharmacy itself. When we review this, or the 20 years I've been at the board, we look at interest, either direct or indirect. The HIPAA officer itself looked like there's a direct relationship or interest between the not-for-profit owned retail pharmacy and Lumis Era through the other side of the corporation. But worst case scenario, it would still be an indirect interest because they are both owned by the same corporation, having direct ownership over both arms.
Okay. Anything else you want to add with regard to the conclusions that you made based on your research?
Only that it appeared to us that the questions answered in both the initial application as well as the change of ownership application were not correct. We also made a phone call to the VP of pharmacy who had signed at least one of those.
Let me ask you this before you go there. So if those questions had been answered yes, on the initial application, I think it's from 2016, and the change of ownership application, which is Exhibit 2, would the board have issued those permits?
We would not. We would have gone ahead and done more research into it then, as well as them answering questions as to what that relationship was. If we would have reviewed this and known this information for either one of those dates, we would not have approved that application.
So at the conclusion of your research and following through with this complaint or inquiry, What did, you do next?
We reached out to, I believe it was Brent Eberly, who was listed on applications as a signatory. And actually, the first question I believe we asked him was, is there any not-for-profit ownership or interest in, Lumis Era up the chain? He immediately said yes. At that point, we started discussion saying, we have a couple of choices here. My initial ask is for you to give up your permits because you're, in our opinion, not eligible to hold a retail pharmacy permit due to the direct or indirect interest with not-for-profit hospitals.
And who all was privy to that telephone conversation?
Myself, Dr. Brenda McCready, and of course, you as our legal counsel were present in my office for that conversation.
And at the conclusion of that conversation, my take was is it fair to say Dr. Eberly was like, okay, I'll have to look into this and we'll let you know, I guess.
That's exactly my understanding as well. He was going to have to get with his legal counsel because I think it was a new issue or concept for him.
All right. And so at the conclusion of that conversation, you instructed me to write a letter to Dr. Eberly. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's under tab number 4.
Okay. And in that letter to Dr. Eberly, who, again, as you said, is the person that signed off on these other applications, does it explain why we were asking them to relinquish their permits?
Yes, it does give an outline of the 1792-607 bar on direct or indirect interest. And it also basically instructed that if basically we would not pursue disciplinary action if they would relinquish the permits at that time.
And did we discuss with Dr. Eberly, if you remember, that we felt that this questions they answered were misrepresentations by them?
Yes.
And is that because when we asked Dr. Eberly, do you have nonprofit hospital interest? What was his answer on the phone?
It was an immediate yes.
But then the question on the application was what?
Was answered no on both applications, even with different questions.
Okay. So at that time, as reflected in this letter, we did say if they relinquish the permits, we would not pursue disciplinary action. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I believe we had already had another discussion or may have even issued an initial order notice of hearing. We'd had a conversation with Mr. Page at one point that our interpretation of this law was consistent for the last 50 years, and that if they did not want to relinquish the permits, then we would have to proceed with disciplinary proceedings to take the permits.
Okay, and let's look at Exhibit 5. Tell the board for the record what Exhibit 5 is.
Exhibit 5 is a September 18th letter to you as our legal counsel from Mr. Paul Page.
All right, and basically, he says he's going to review the law and basically get back to us.
Yes.
Okay. And then what did you choose to do at that point after receiving this letter?
Well, through this, and I believe another conversation where we're trying to get Mr. Page, we finally decided we had to issue an order notice of hearing to outline what the charges or allegations would be against the permits.
Well, let me ask you this. We did have a conversation with Mr. Page at one point, correct?
Yes, we did.
And did we ask him the same question that we asked Dr. Eberly about the nonprofit ownership interest?
My recollection is that, yes, we asked him a similar question.
And do you recall what his answer was?
I believe he also answered that, yes, they were owned by a nonprofit corporation, but there wasn't a direct ownership relationship with the hospitals themselves.
Okay. And if you look, I'm going to point you to Exhibit 7. And that looks to be a string of emails. Is that your interpretation?
Yes, this is a string of emails back and forth with Mr. Page and with you, Ms. Bales, our legal counsel.
Okay. And if you look, it's enumerated on the email 4. So Mr. Page sort of explains his position and talks about Walmart and stock in Walmart. can you explain your interpretation of what that argument was?
Yes, in part of our phone conversation even, he tried to discuss that SSM Health owned more stock in Walmart than it did in Lumis Era or Navitas. And that if we were taking the stance that you could not have direct or indirect interest from a not-for-profit hospital, then that would mean the Board of Pharmacy would have to revoke all the Walmart pharmacy permits in the state or in-state or out-of-state, because that would be deemed as interest that they owned, I guess, common stock in that corporation.
Did you find did that sway you in changing your viewpoint on this nonprofit ownership interest argument?
It did not.
Okay. And so at that point, would you classify this as sort of an impasse between us and Lumis Era?
Yes, I did.
And so in response to that, did we issue a notice of hearing back in 2023?
Yes, we did.
And if you'll look under exhibit, I guess it's 1A. It's been amended to change the date, but is that substantially what we sent to Lumis Era back in 2023?
This is very similar to what we sent back in September 23.
We didn't pursue it. We scheduled it, I believe, for the October board meeting, but that didn't occur. Tell the board why we didn't have a hearing in October about this.
We issued the order notice of hearing as well as a subpoena at that time. The subpoena was for all shipments into the state of Arkansas. My position investigating this was that if the answers would have been answered correctly, a permit would have never been issued, and therefore any business that had happened in the state because of the incorrect answer on the application would have been called into question as business that occurred due to a misrepresentation of the applicant to obtain a permit. When we further discussed this, almost immediately after the order notice was sent, as well as a subpoena, very quickly, Mr. Page and other representatives of Lumis Era wanted to rediscuss this. And we basically said, if you will give up your permit, then we will pull back the order notice of hearing and the subpoena and let this matter rest.
Okay, and so they agreed to do that, correct?
They did, reluctantly.
And we turned off their permits in our system.
Yes, we did.
And what happened next?
I believe it was a couple of months later, we received a new application to apply for licensure for one of the facilities. We had already had this discussion over with a corrected answer of yes on the direct or indirect interest, not-for-profit question.
And I believe that's in Lumis Era's exhibits. So I'm going to point you to exhibit
Hey.
A. And what was the date that was signed for on that application?
Dr. Eberly signed it on 12/6. Other representatives signed it on 12/7 of 2023.
So that's approximately what, 2 months maybe after they agreed to relinquish the permits, correct?
That is correct.
All right, and let me look the beginning of the application. How did they answer the questions about nonprofit ownership in this application?
If you go over to page 4 on it, they answered both E and F in the affirmative of yes.
All right, and so you believe this application is not a misrepresentation. Is that a fair statement?
That would be correct.
What did we do with this, or what did you instruct me to do with this application?
We actually had to discuss a decent bit how to handle this application. In my years, I've never had anyone give up a permit for a reason, which we would generally say for cause, and then immediately or very close to that reapply. We determined, since we'd already had discussions, that the corporation itself was not eligible for a retail permit. We refunded their money and returned their application to them.
And why was that decision made to refund it as opposed to deny it?
If we had denied it, then it would be seen as a negative action taken on Lumis Era. It would have been flagged and reported to our national data bank as many states would consider that a disciplinary action of denial versus just returning the application to them, knowing we would not be able to issue a permit.
Okay, so we decided to avoid disciplining them or by denying or having it appear to be disciplinary action by returning the application instead of denying it, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you instructed me to return this application and the payment back to Lumis Era.
Yes.
All right, and then what happened next?
And we got a second application shortly after that.
And tell the board the dates that was submitted. No. One minute. Okay, that's not good. Okay, tell, the board what we did. We received I guess it would be a second application after the relinquishment of the permits, correct?
Yes, and we handled it in a similar manner by returning that application, as well as the note of why we were returning it as being ineligible to apply.
And that application wasn't signed off on by the same people. Mr. Gerst, who's here, is the one who signed that application, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And again, we returned it instead of denying it.
Yes.
Okay. The questions on this Gerst application from 2024, were those answered in your opinion correctly based on your research?
I believe so. Exhibit E under Lumis Era is the letter that we sent it back. That second application is, I believe it's C. Nope. I believe that is Exhibit B. That was the application submitted. B is another one from 2023. And Exhibit D was received September 10th of 2024.
And just since the board is looking at that, point them to the questions on that application.
It is on page 4 of that application under Lumis Era's Exhibit D. Is there any nonprofit interest in your pharmacy? Yes. Any interest in or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital? Yes.
All right, and that one was submitted by,
Full page.
yeah. So since the, relinquishment of the permits, based on our discussion with Mr. Page, we've had at least 2 other applications submitted.
Yes, we have.
Okay. And so, anything else you want to talk to the board about with regard to your research?
The second application from 2021 for a change of ownership, I mean, we did have an issue with it. It was not submitted in a timely manner. At that time, not being aware of the correct answer of yes for the ownership or the interest in not-for-profit, we did do a $2,500 non-disciplinary paperwork fee for it being submitted in an untimely manner. Generally speaking, if you do not submit an application in the 14 days that are required for a change of ownership, that permit is void. Any business that's done on that permit is actually not legitimate business since there is not a valid permit at that time. The only other thing I would say is, from the staff perspective, generally, if we have someone that surrenders a permit for cause, if this is kind of the first time we've had this happen, but when they try to come back and reapply for the same permit by making corrections to their application, we already accept a surrender by 4 calls. And therefore we said, well, if we're going to have to hear this issue, then we're going to reopen the disciplinary side of the case because the board needs to make a judgment call on the potential discipline that would have happened before we can make any other decisions on future permits.
All right. And you and I think Dr. McCready also met with Lumis Era's counsel, Mr. Castleberry, and explained our position to him at some point during this process as well, correct?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And so let's go and look at the statute itself. 1792-607A. And has this statute been challenged before?
Yes, it has.
And were you working here at the Board of Pharmacy when it was challenged in the past?
I was working here at the Board of Pharmacy at least the last time it was challenged, and we had a case in court over it.
And tell the board, and I think we can turn to the exhibit. It's 9, and then the order is 10. What's the style of that case?
So this case was a similar application with the Board of Pharmacy back, I want to say it was in 2016 or so. It's been several years. This one was CHI National Home Care with a DBA of Amerimed or Amerimed Pharmacy Incorporated. During both the review of that application and during the court proceedings, they showed a very similar structure of how there was a parent corporation that had a for-profit arm. It's actually on page 3 of Exhibit 9 that would show that Catholic Health Initiatives owned a corporation, CHI National Services, which owned a corporation, CHI National Home Care, which owned or had a DBA of the pharmacy itself. When we had reviewed facts for that case, it was very similar in that instead of being SSM Health, it was CHI or Catholic Health Initiatives that had one side of an arm that was for-profit, including retail pharmacy, and another side that was not-for-profit, which included ownership in not-for-profit hospitals. For our staff review and our legal counsel at the time, it looks to be an almost identical type of structuring to what we looked at with SSM and Lumis Era.
And did we discuss with Mr. Castleberry, Mr. Page, Mr. Everly that this case was kind of in our history and why we interpreted that statute that way?
Yes, we did.
All right. And so when this came up, you did go back and look at this case again, correct?
Yes, I did.
And based on your living through that litigation, do you feel that when the board went to circuit court on the Amerimed case, that Judge Piazza told the board that they interpreted the statute correctly?
Yes, Judge Piazza gave that, as I recall, even as a verbal, and even said that if there's an argument to be made about the statute itself, it's a statutory issue, not an issue of interpretation of the statute.
All right. So based on the Amerimed case and the interpretation by Judge Piazza, did that form the basis for the decision-making in the Lumis Era case and what to do with that application as well?
Yes, we followed the same decision-making.
And previously, there was another case where it was challenged as well, correct?
There have been a couple of other instances before I was at the board where there were challenges over decisions of the board based on these cases.
And it's one of those Arkansas Hospital Association versus Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy.
Yes, that's under tab 11.
You were not present at the board when that was litigated, correct? That was, or you didn't participate in that. That was the opinion delivered by the Supreme Court of Arkansas in 1989.
Yes, I was not in pharmacy at that time.
But did we look at this case as part of the research and what to do with this Lumis Era matter?
We reviewed this case as well as another that involved St. Bernard's at a previous time.
All right. So just in summary, and let's go to the charts. Tell the board why you feel that Lumis Era has nonprofit hospital interests.
Our belief and the interpretation of the board for years that has been asked to staff has been, if you have a corporation that owns both, and ownership is a very easy way to define it, but has interest directly or indirectly in both not-for-profit hospitals as well as retail pharmacy, then it would be a conflict that the statute would exclude ownership.
All right, and so looking at this chart, can you explain to the board where you see nonprofit hospital interest?
I mean, very simply, with SSM Healthcare Corporation owning both hospitals, not-for-profit under those 4 sub-corporations, as well as having a separate for-profit arm, via FPP, Dean Health Systems, down to Dean Retail Services, Naftas Holdings, and then Lumis Era. Anytime if we do Google searches or anything else, Lumis Era has SSM Health all over their branding. They appear to have potential interest or conflicts by utilizing HIPAA officers or staff that they even refer their patients to that are directly owned by not-for-profit hospitals.
Right, and we do have statements over the telephone that when you ask their corporate officers, is there any nonprofit hospital interest? They answered yes, correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
And then on the subsequent applications, they submitted to the board after the relinquishment of the permits, they answered those questions. Yes, there's nonprofit interest in our corporate structure. Is that your recollection?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so for that reasons, do you feel that on the initial applications, they misrepresented themselves when they answered those questions? No.
Yes, I do.
Right, and that's the basis for the order notice of hearing in 2023-124.
Yes.
And what are you asking the board to do with regard to this case?
Well, at this point, I mean, if the board also agreed that the permit was obtained by misrepresentation, fraud, or anything else, then that would have been illegally obtaining a permit, and we would ask the board to revoke that permit.
And they relinquished it on the to avoid this disciplinary hearing initially. But by refiling the applications and I guess submitting this declaratory order petition, do you feel like that agreement was basically broken?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you're asking the board for disciplinary action with regard to Lumis Era on this case 2024-124, is that correct?
That is correct.
Anything else you want to add with regard to this case?
Just that in general, when the board would find someone that had obtained a permit by fraud or misrepresentation, generally they would revoke or remove their ability to have that permit, as well as revoke their ability to apply for another.
And that is what you're requesting the board to do?
It is.
If they find the facts as we presented them?
Yes, it is.
All right, anything else you want to add?
That's it.
Pass the witness.
Morning. Can we get your mic on? We do it all the time.
Remember that, but I don't think I actually have yet. So kind of working backwards with respect to Lumis Era's agreement to withdraw its or surrender its licenses back in September of 2023. Do you have the board's exhibit 7 before you?
Yes, I do. I can grab it real quick. Yes, sir.
Board's exhibit 7 is a series of emails between looks like you, Ms. Bales, Mr. Page, and others. On page 2, toward the top, is an email from Mr. Page to Ms. Bales. Do you see that email?
I do.
Dated September 27, 2023.
Yes.
And at the end of that email, Mr. Page says, we will also look forward to a time in the future when Lumis Era will be readmitted to the practice of pharmacy, and we will be able to resume providing care to the people of the great state of Arkansas. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Is there anywhere in this series of emails where Lumis Era or anyone on Lumis Era's behalf agreed to not submit an application for pharmacy license in Arkansas in the future?
No, they did not.
But that was your understanding of the agreement?
That was my understanding with the conversations we have. If the statute would change, then it would be a completely different consideration for their applications.
And in exchange for Lumis Era surrendering its licenses, you, on behalf of the board, agreed to stand down on the disciplinary action that was pending at that time, correct?
Yes, I did.
And after Lumis Era submitted the petition for declaratory order that is also pending here today, the board refiled, if you will, the charges against Lumis Era, correct?
Yes,
And there are 3 charges listed in that amended order, correct?
I believe that's correct.
This was Exhibit 1A to the board's packet. The charges are on page 4. We'll come back to these, but these are the 3 charges that are at issue today, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you've also discussed the Amerimed case that was decided at the circuit court level here in Pulaski County in 2016, and that was attached as Exhibit 10 to the board's packet.
Yes.
And you would please turn to Exhibit 9 of the board's packet. This is a legal filing made on behalf of CHI National Home Care in the Amerimed case, correct?
That is correct.
And I would direct your attention to page 10 of that filing.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes, sir.
I'm not seeing Exhibit 9 on the Lumis Era O&H tab. Is anybody else?
Oh, this is the board's packet, sir.
It says exhibit 10, previous legal cases. So it's going to be,
Okay.
Amerimed brief in support of judicial review. Sorry about that.
So
That's what we're looking at on
Sorry to
10 of that.
No, no problem.
I'm with you.
For you, sir. Toward the bottom of the page, the brief cites another Pulaski County Circuit case. I don't know how you say this, Olive Tan or Livitan.
I think it's a
Benedictine.
Leavton, but
I have no clue. Versus Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy, Circuit Court of Pulaski County, CV-98-2576, October 23rd, 1998. I assume that was before your time at the board.
it was.
Okay. Are you aware that in that case, Judge David Bogard found, in a way contrary to the court's finding in the Amerimed Circuit Court case?
My understanding is that he did. It's actually on page 11 that the board at that time acted arbitrarily. My understanding of it was that the board did not have before nor inquire to establish a set of factual circumstances, that they made a decision, I guess it was without an application or something along those lines.
So in the language from that decision quoted on the page, top of page 11, the last sentence in that quote said, under this scenario, the only connection between the nonprofit corporation and the retail pharmacy business would be that both are owned by the same corporation. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And that's the scenario we have here, is it not? That the pharmacy side and the hospital side connection is through common ownership.
Yes.
And I believe you'd agree with me that you're not aware of any authority from the Arkansas Court of Appeals or Arkansas Supreme Court on this issue.
Not that I'm aware of, other than that old Supreme Court case, which was different.
Yeah, that only addressed the constitutionality of the statute, correct?
That's my understanding, but
It,
not being an attorney,
I
I
understand.
defer to others.
I understand. I'm trying to just establish that we've got 2 circuit courts that have found 2 different ways and no appellate court that's told us which one's right and which one's wrong. Is that your understanding?
I guess so.
Okay, that's fair. We will go through the documents and the page affidavit on my side of this in a moment. I don't want to belabor the point, but going back to the org chart, that is, I believe each of the board members has a copy of. On the right side of that org chart, from Lumis Era up. So starting with Lumis Era, would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in Lumis Era?
That is my understanding, yes.
And would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in Navitas Health Solutions LLC?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in Navitas Holdings LLC?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in Dean Retail Services, Inc.?
Yes, I would.
And would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in Dean Health Systems, Inc.?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital owns an interest in FPP, Inc.?
Yes, I would.
So do you agree that SSM Healthcare Corporation itself is not a nonprofit hospital?
I would agree with that. I believe they own not-for-profit hospitals, but they're not one permitted themselves.
Okay, and hospital is defined somewhere in the Arkansas code, correctly?
Yes, it is.
And so to put a little bit finer point on it, we've agreed SSM Healthcare Corporation itself is not a hospital, correct?
Yes.
SSM Healthcare Corporation is the sole member of other nonprofit corporations which own hospitals. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I believe so.
So the nonprofit hospitals, which are listed over on the left side of this document, are owned by SSM Healthcare St. Louis, SSM Healthcare of Oklahoma, SSM Healthcare of Wisconsin, Inc., and I believe the entity on the far right is Good Samaritan Region, no, excuse me, is SSM Health Good Samaritan Hospital.
I have SSM Regional Health Services, which goes down to the Good
Yeah.
Samaritan hospitals.
I think that, yeah, I think that is, I believe that's correct. We'll clarify that with Mr. Garrett. So it is not your contention that a nonprofit hospital holds any ownership interest in Lumis Era. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Either directly or indirectly.
That is correct.
So what type of interest does a nonprofit hospital hold? I believe is the, let me get these words become important. So we'll read the statute. So we're precise. It shall be unlawful for any nonprofit, tax exempt, or governmentally funded hospital to acquire direct or indirect interest in or otherwise hold directly or indirectly a licensed pharmacy permit pursuant to the provisions of section 17-92-405 for the sale at retail of drugs and medicines. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
So I think the operative word, since we're not talking about an interest being acquired, I don't believe, the operative word is hold. What is your position as to the interest in Lumis Era that a nonprofit hospital holds?
Based on the history of the Board of Pharmacy decisions that I have been involved in, since it does not direct that it is only ownership interest, direct or indirect, I mean, we could make an argument that there is indirect ownership interest between the two because the same entity owns both. When we were in court with Amerimed, that is the literal definition that was argued at that point, was it's not direct ownership even at worst case scenario, but at minimum, there is ownership of both, therefore they have an interest in each other. The way that we probably explained it before is kind of like a family tree. They're related. They're related, they have interest in each other. There's a direct blood relation between both of them at the grandparent or great-grandparent or some level split up by different corporations. The other thing that is a little bit unique with SSM Health is if it's direct or indirect interest, ignoring ownership. In other areas of the statute, like in insurance statutes, they even talk about ownership as a specified term of legal art or whatever they would say. But in this one, when we also found that Lumis Era Health Services has direct relationships with the employment side, even on HIPAA privacy, and we don't know what else it might be. for the HIPAA privacy that is jointly operated with a hospital-owned entity itself, that is a different conflict than we've faced before as well.
Well, I understand, and I appreciate your answer, but trying to drill down a little bit with respect to this interest. I believe you agree with me that no nonprofit hospital has an ownership interest in Lumis Era, correct?
That is correct.
And then I'd asked what interest then does it hold? We found the hold is the operative word. And you've explained to me that there is a relationship because there is common ownership up the tree, however many degrees it may be. But relationship, again, sir, is not the same as holding an interest in. But what I'm trying to find out is what type of interest does a nonprofit hospital hold in Lumis Era?
In this example, my answer would be that they are related companies still. And as related companies, they hold interest in each other because in this area of the statute, it did not nail down that it had to be ownership. In some ways, I understand the difficulty of both the question and the answer, because when it doesn't give a specified definition of what interest is, it's something you have to look at. In this example, my answer from the board would be that because they are both entities that are part of the same overall corporation, they would appear to have interest between each other as entities of the same corporation. This one is somewhat different because the other interest they have is I guess they are co-employing or using employees back and forth between a directly hospital-owned employee for Lumis Era as well.
And that's based upon the website you mentioned earlier on the HIPAA compliance officer?
Yes.
Do you have any other evidence of sharing employees other than that?
Not that I can think of right now.
So,
I'll have to clarify. Not at the direct Lumis Era to SSM Health Care St. Louis side, but my understanding is that SSM Health Corporation has employees that are both directors over Lumis Era and may also have interest in the not-for-profit hospital. So it's at a level higher than Lumis Era, not necessarily below.
but we've agreed that SSM Health Care Corporation is not a hospital, correct?
They are not a hospital. They own hospitals.
And I won't belabor the point, I want to make sure I completely understand. Your position is because they are related, that confers a sufficient interest to disqualify Lumis Era under this statute?
Yes.
And your basis for that belief is the circuit court's ruling in Amerimet, correct?
Yes, the most recent one we have.
So if we've established that SSM Healthcare Corporation is not a hospital, but as I understand it, it is your position because of SSM Healthcare Corporation's other holdings, it cannot own any interest in a pharmacy in Arkansas. Is that correct?
Any interest in any permit that would allow the sale of drugs at retail.
Okay. What's the reason for that distinction?
Well, so there are different permits that actually would sell drugs at retail. There are also retail permits that sell no drugs. So we have had instances where corporations needed a retail permit for something such as performing medication therapy management services or patient management services, different clinical services. There have been a couple of instances where the board has granted a retail permit with a memorandum of understanding that they could not sell any drugs at retail, but they could use that permit for other purposes other than the sale of drugs at retail. It'd be very similar to, say, my guess is that Lumis Era probably has some patient management that they actually are reimbursed for patient management. Either they're helping for Medicare program with stars ratings or something else. There are other lines of business other than the sale of drugs at retail that we would be able to give a permit for.
Understood, because this statute only prohibits the issuance of a pharmacy permit for the sale of drugs at retail.
Yes, it doesn't say they are banned from having a retail permit. It's any type of permit that would allow the sale of drugs at retail.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I understand the distinction now. So to refine my question, it's your position then that because of SSM Healthcare Corporation's other holdings, it cannot own an interest in a company that has a pharmacy permit for the sale of drugs at retail.
That is correct.
And back to your discussion with Mr. Page with respect to his hypothetical, if SSM owned stock in a publicly traded company, that publicly traded company then would be ineligible for a retail pharmacy permit in Arkansas, correct?
That is not my interpretation.
How is it that SSM's ownership of an ownership interest in a publicly traded company is different than SSM's ownership of a private corporation that would like to hold a pharmacy permit for retail sales?
Well, I think in this instance, SSM actually is a controller of the other corporations. It's not just the fact that I might happen to own stock. I mean, anyone can buy publicly traded stock in any corporation. That does not give them any control in that. You could argue that they do have a financial interest in the stock doing well, but at the same time, there's not Walmart pharmacy stock. It's Walmart Corporation stock.
Statute doesn't speak to control, does it?
No, it does not.
It speaks to interest. And it doesn't really tell us whether that's ownership interest or some other type of interest, correct?
That's correct.
When you were asked initially about your first conversation with, I believe it was Dr. Eberly? Is that
Eberly.
Eberly? You mentioned that when you called him and asked about this issue, your testimony initially was whether there was nonprofit ownership up the chain. Those were your words a moment ago. Is that consistent with what you recall asking him?
I believe so. If there was not-for-profit ownership above Lumis Era or Navitas.
Okay. We asked about hospitals earlier, but you also would agree with me that Navitas Health Solutions LLC is not a not-for-profit entity. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
But when they say that that there's no ownership of Lumis Era by a nonprofit entity, that's a correct statement, is it not?
I don't believe so.
Lumis Era is owned 100% by Navitas Health Solutions LLC, and you just agreed that Navitas Health Solutions LLC is not a nonprofit.
I believe if you look at our question, I'm going back to look now. Are you asking me the specific question they answered or a separate question that you're asking?
So let me ask a better question. I'm looking at
if I look at
let me
Exhibit
I think
2.
I could put a little fine point on it if you don't mind. So I'm looking at I think the two applications that are at issue for purposes of this hearing are the 2016 and 2021 application.
That's correct.
Okay. So the 2016 application on page 4 asks 2 questions. So let me break them down. You have that before you, sir?
Yes.
Okay. The first question is there any nonprofit ownership of your pharmacy?
Yes.
And we've just confirmed that Lumis Era Health is owned 100% by Navitas Health Solutions LLC, which is not a nonprofit, correct?
That is correct.
So the answer no to that question is a factually correct answer.
To that portion of the question, it could be.
Okay, all right. So the second part is any ownership by or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital. Did I read that portion of the question correctly?
Yes, you did.
And they answered no to that.
They did answer no to that.
And you believe that that is an incorrect answer?
I do.
And do you, has there been any proof that you have uncovered that that question was answered incorrectly on purpose with the intent to answer incorrectly?
I can't answer the intent on that.
And let's break that question down. Any ownership by a not-for-profit hospital? You would agree that answer of no to that question would be correct?
I do agree.
So your contention is solely with the following question. Any relationship with a not-for-profit hospital?
Yes.
So we refine it to that is That is the question to which you believe there was an incorrect answer given on the applications, correct?
Yes, I do.
And that would apply to both applications?
No, because it's different questions.
I think they're kind of the same. Let's look at them just to make sure. They're broken out differently, but I think they're the same. Let's look.
They're actually quite different. After the AmeriMed case, we updated our application.
So in 2021, on page 4 of that application, it says, is there any nonprofit interest in your pharmacy?
Yes.
And the answer to that question is no. Again, we come back to what does interest mean? If you believe that interest to mean ownership interest, then they answered that question correctly. Agreed?
I do not agree with that.
I think you just agreed with that with respect to the previous application.
To the specific question, but that was about ownership, not interest.
No, but I said if you assume that interest means ownership interest.
Oh, if it had said ownership interest, I would agree at the parent level, yes.
If it said, oh, if the person answering this question thought that meant ownership interest, then they answered it accurately, correct?
I wouldn't agree with that, but because I would not have answered it that way, because that's not the question that's being asked. If we had a hypothetical, which is what we got in trouble with on the Benedictine case before, in that hypothetical, if it said, is there direct ownership at the parent level by a not-for-profit company, and you said no, then I would agree that would be a correct answer.
All of the ownership interest in Lumis Era is in Navitas Health Solutions LLC, correct?
At the parent level.
At any level, that's all the owners, they own all of them. Something else owns Navitas, I agree, but to that specific question, that's correct, right?
You're going to have to get a business attorney or someone expert in that. I understand your question that the immediate ownership may be a for-profit corporation, but with my years at the Board of Pharmacy, we don't necessarily just look at the parent corporation. We don't, because there are too many either disregarded companies, DBAs, different registrations. We have to go generally beyond that.
In the 2021 application, the next question under F is any interest in or relationship with a not-for-profit hospital. Again, we've got the question about interest, which we discussed plenty, I think. Won't go back to that. You believe they should have checked yes, because at least for one reason, you believe they have a relationship with a not-for-profit hospital, correct?
Yes.
And your basis for that belief is because there is common ownership up the chain that also owns not-for-profit hospitals separately from the Lumis Era chain of ownership, correct?
That and the fact that they share HIPAA privacy officers in their corporations.
You cannot testify, can you, that the person answering these two questions did so in bad faith with the intent to deceive the board?
I cannot.
Would you agree with me that a person answering these questions in good faith could answer them in the way they were answered by Lumis Era?
I would not agree with that.
You don't think it's possible for someone to read those questions and in good faith conclude that the answer is no?
I believe that there are people that believe they answered it correctly, but I cannot say that that is in good faith, basically because if you are filling out these applications, especially for a corporation the size of what we're dealing with, and that it is obtained a permit, I would hope that someone would have read and understood the questions better than just saying, well, I answered no in good faith. I mean, we face this a lot with criminal background checks of, people that make an assumption, oh, I thought it only meant in the last 5 years if I had gotten a felony conviction. And it's the same argument. Well, in good faith, I thought that I was telling you what you were asking, but the application was still incorrect. It's a tough question, I think, for applicants of, do you believe you've answered it right? And I'm sure that they probably believe that they do. I just don't happen to agree with them.
It's a fair answer. Thank you, sir. Pass the witness.
If I may, for just a moment, it's 5 after 12. I don't know what the board's practice is for breaking, whether we go through or they break for lunch. I'm just trying to find out what the board practice has been and cases like this?
I would imagine this is going to continue for a while.
So the order will be your next, but our next, I mean, maybe we could, if the board member have questions, Dr. Curley, maybe at least get through that part as a stopping point.
That's what I was trying to get to, is
Okay.
whether or not we want to get to a stopping point and where that would be for purposes of the board, so. All right, if with that, we ready to continue?
Yeah, I'm not gonna, redirect Dr. Kirtley, at this point. I'll reserve doing that if I could after any board members have any questions.
I'm gonna go to the board. Board, do you have any questions for, the witness?
I have one question. So in the statute 1792-607A, thank you. Is there a definition of relationship?
No, sir.
I don't know if you've talked about it a lot, so it would seem to fit in here, but if it needs to be asked of someone else. So up until on the 2021 application, the answer regarding nonprofit interest was no. And then secondly, was there interest or relationship with nonprofit hospitals? So it made a distinction between a nonprofit in general versus nonprofit hospital. But then in 2023, the answer to both of those questions went to yes. So what changed other than simply the answer? And I'm just curious, has that made it go to intent, or was there good faith when you have a wholesale change in the answers from no to yes, and then yes again on both of those? Because given that it was a two-answer yes, it would seem to be that there would not have been an issuance of a license. So I'm trying to figure out what changed. Do you know what, if anything?
I don't know. All I can do is take the educated guess that at that point, Lumis Era was aware of the board's stance in the interpretation of the law and the law itself, and answered correctly.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. So there's two permits here. Is one of them an out-of-state specialty pharmacy?
Both of them.
Both of them are out-of-state specialty pharmacies. None for operation here in Little Rock or anything like that?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there a statute? I mean, I'm probably asking the same question that Dr. Richmond did, but do we have a statutory, any type of guidance that can be given to the board as far as a legal or statutory definition of indirect interest?
All I can answer to that is just the observations I've had for 20 of the almost 50 years of the statute.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is, would it have, I guess it would be possible for actually one of these actual nonprofit hospitals to have a sidearm, for lack of a better word, of a for-profit LLC, and then apply through that pathway.
We've been approached with business models like that over the years with the Board of Pharmacy, and have basically answered, you can't do an end run around the direct or indirect interest aspect of that by just simply putting an intermediary for-profit or separate corporation. That's the guidance I feel like staff has been given by the board for many years.
But in that situation, that intermediary is directly linked in ownership, holding or interest to the nonprofit hospital itself, right?
Yes, if they do a single intermediary, if they decided to put 4 in the latter, then there's an argument that it's at the great-great-grandparent level. When we look at changes of ownership, for instance, we have constant arguments or discussions over if you think about it being a direct straight up and down ladder, if there's a change in one of the rungs between the top and the bottom, does it really change the relationship between the top and the bottom? And it generally doesn't. This would be more like a hotel with different sets of stairwells going to different floors, but it's all one hotel.
Okay. That's all I had. Oh, I had one more question. The Amerimed case, am I saying that right? I'm not
Yes.
familiar with that case. I know the structure may not be exactly the same because there's lots of layers here. But was the structure the same in the sense that the parent corporation was it was nonprofit, but was it a nonprofit hospital? Or was it a nonprofit corporation just like this one? And then was it, how do they compare?
My recollection is, and we don't have a different copy of what was in the actual physical exhibit at court. But at the time, our attorney, was Chris Carnahan. He actually even used their chart to point out that there was at least an indirect, relationship even, which would infer that there has to be interest if there's a relationship. And it was very similar to this setup. There was CHI at the top with a for-profit arm that went down to National Home Care, that went down further to Amerimed. And there was a different not-for-profit side of it that included many corporations around the country that included ownership of not-for-profit hospitals, even here in our state.
Okay, but the right-hand side, for lack of a better definition, was all for-profit down to the pharmacy level?
I believe so.
Okay, thanks.
Online members, do you have any questions? Seeing none. Board members, more questions? Okay. Ms. Bales, how would you like to proceed? Want to redirect, or do we want to take what's the will of the board? Want to keep going or break, or what do you want to do?
I consider we have lunch ready. I'm gonna propose we take a break.
Okay. 30 minutes.
45, because they got to get lunch too.
Okay. All right. Well, it is 12. I have 12:15. We will resume at 1 o'clock. So we are in recess.
Thank you.